welcome back to my channel. I'm Beth and I read, but if you read my handle differently, you are more than welcome to stay. It is currently the 1st of March. February is officially over and I'm just gonna have a ramble about the books that I read during the month. I read 6 books, totaling 2,700 pages overall. It's a bit lower than normal, but I've been working really hard and I think I'm starting to get my reading bug back. I think I was in a bit of a slump. Anywho, first book I want to talk about is Promise Me Not. This one, I've already rambled about how much I love Say You Swear, which is book 1, in the first video that I posted to this channel. This was not it. So we follow Ari's brother from book 1 and Peyton, who we met in book 1. She's kind of like adjacent to their big friend group. She gets adopted by them. When we met her in the first book, she had just had a baby. This whole book goes into detail about how she became pregnant, why she chose to keep the baby, and the journey from having the baby through to being a toddler, and the love story between these two characters. In theory alone, this is a book that I should like. What I didn't like about it was it felt a bit more childish, which I was not jamming with, and the characters didn't really give us any reason for why they liked each other. There was a choice made in this where we kind of had dual narratives going on. So we kind of had from when they first met up until there's like a conflict and we don't know what the conflict is, and then from the conflict up until essentially present day, the end of the story. But what happens is if we kind of have like one chapter from each, so the story is kind of synonymously happening, but we don't get the conflict until like right at the end of the book, and I think that didn't jam so well with me. Like, it didn't make sense why we were like pining over here and why we were miscommunicating and behaving just really weird and awkward. It was a choice. It did not work for me. In fairness, the very end of the book was very sweet and I did like it. I just didn't particularly enjoy the journey to get there. So book 3 has been announced, which is Cam's story, which like I don't really give a shit about Cam, so like is what it is. But we've also been announced that Chase is going to get a story in here, and because of his kind of antagonist role in book 1 and book 2, I am keen to read his story. So I think this is one I'm just going to have to stick with, even if I find that I don't enjoy book 3 similar to how I felt about book 2. It's something where I do wonder if the fact that I've been reading contemporary romance quite intensely for so long is affecting my enjoyment, where stories that are just like okay are just not doing it for me, because when you've read excellence, it's really hard to read kind of mediocrity. Anyway, if you're interested in this series, particularly if you are younger than I am, I think you'll enjoy this a lot more. As someone who really wants like reasoning and almost a bit of logic in the feeling, yeah, not for me. The next 2 books I want to talk about are Cleopatra and Frankenstein, and thank you for listening, both of which were part of my traveling book club. We're a bit backlogged from when we started last year, so I read 2 this month to try and catch up, and I'm back on track for mine. Cleopatra and Frankenstein, I really liked the first chapter. Such a strong meet cute. We have Cleo, who's like a young artist in New York, and she quite literally bumps into this man Frank, and Frank's kind of in his 40s. He's a bit older than her. He's a failed director turned advertiser, and even though there kind of is this almost taboo age gap, they have this really instant and genuine connection with each other, and the book basically entails following their relationship through the course of a year. Each chapter kind of jumps around about a month. One of my big problems with this book is the whole premise is based on a relationship between 2 people. Whilst we have chapters from Cleo and Frank in their perspective, we jump around between people who are peripheral to their story as well. So we have like a best friend, a work colleague, acquaintance, like all of these random people who kind of are interwoven in the story, but then we kind of go and explore them and their lives, some of which are just like not really relevant to the main plot at all. So I found the story to be very confused in what it was trying to communicate. This was sold to me as a love story. 100% this is not a love story. So let's just settle that debate right here, right now. There are some heavy themes that are explored in this. I struggled with the struggling artist trope, and one of our characters does struggle with suicidal ideation, which is explored in the book very minorly. I feel like both of them are really just like skimmed, and it wasn't deeply explored. It felt like they were more used for almost shock value, or for, you know, the struggling artist archetype, as opposed to actually exploring anything of what that actually means. The writing itself was actually quite beautiful. Because we were, you know, annotating this book, I did find that there was a lot of things that did stick out to me in terms of quotes and things that did touch home. So I liked the writing, but the story itself, which is the reason I read. Like, I'm an escapism reader. I read for the story. The story just wasn't anything. Like I said, I do think that there is a certain reader who will get along with this. It is not me. I gave it 2 stars because I do think the writing was beautiful. I just feel like it was really shallow, and there are people who are praising this, saying like this is a really in-depth character study. Did we read the same book? Because I don't get it. I've read much more in-depth, interesting character studies in contemporary romances, fluffy contemporary romances, than I read in Cleopatra and Frankenstein. At the same time, with my negative feelings towards this book, I am glad that I read it, and I think it was a really good choice for a book club, because I think people will get different things out of the book. So if you are in a traveling book club or a book club of sorts, this would be an interesting read, worthy of discussion with your group. The second one, thank you for listening. I've mentioned most of my thoughts on this one already in a previous vlog that I've made, so not gonna ramble on about it. I liked it. This was really solid. It's the kind of romance book that really jams for me, where the romance is the forefront of the plot, but there is so much more surrounding these characters that make them grounded and authentic. The plot is about audiobook narrators who fall in love, being written by someone who is an actress. She's an audiobook narrator. There was so much like truth brought into the book, and it was really easy reading. Not one I would have picked up. I gave it 4 stars. And I'm really glad that I read it. My roommate Teach, she read it on audiobook, and she said it was really good on audiobook. So potentially one that would be worth exploring in audiobook format if you're going to check this one out. I had 2 more book club reads, so these were kind of read at different points in the month for my weekly book club. So book 3 and 4 in The Curse of the Siren Queen. So we finished up the series this month, and overall I had pretty positive feelings towards it. It's definitely not one of my favorites, and I can definitely see myself looking back in a year's time and not remembering much about the book. But the fact that we got to read this one together, and because you slow down by doing a weekly book club, it does enable you to pause and reflect on character motivations, character choices, plot points, start theorizing about what might happen, particularly as it rounds up towards the end of the series. So I'm not going to talk too in depth, because one, most people don't know about this book. I don't know anyone who knows about this series, and 2, it's books 3 and 4, so major spoilers. I gave book 3 4 stars. I think book 3 might have been my favorite in the series, and then book 4 I gave 3 stars. Overall for the series, I think it's solid. Probably not one I'd like actively recommend to people, but I really enjoyed reading this with my book club. And it's exciting because the reason we selected the series in the first place is because the author is coming to Babe, the Ball Gowns and Books event in Sydney, in pretty much bang on 3 months time. So really glad that we've done that. We're going to start our next series for the book club soon. My book club girls did joke that like there were a few things that when we met on Tuesday to discuss the end of the series, where we kind of went, I don't think this was addressed in the plot. Like, was it just me? We have joked that when we go and meet Helen at Babe, that we're going to just have like a scroll full of questions as to like, how does this work? I don't understand. What happened to this? I still had a really good time, and I'm glad that I read it with my book club girls. I'm referring to my spreadsheet that I have, just like a spreadsheet reading tracker that I used. Turns out I just didn't add one of the books that I read this month, so I actually read 7 total. I finished up the Ruinous Love trilogy. This was a great way to round up the trilogy. Loved book 1. I read book 1 when it was still on KU and just completely devoured it. I loved it so much. Like, it was exactly what I was looking for. Something that was a bit morbid, a bit dark, a bit gross, but also really lighthearted and gave you that sense of like levity and escapism. It was a perfect Bethany read. Loved book 1. Book 2 was not it, my friends. I felt like the characters, there was no reasoning behind why they liked each other, and I felt like it was so much just trying to like mirror the beats of the first book rather than telling a story that was focused on our 2 primary characters. So I gave that 2 stars. I thought it was okay. So I was really, really nervous about how the trilogy was going to finish up because I had such conflicting feelings between book 1 and 2. Nah, she hit it. This was what I wanted book 3 to be. Book 1 is kind of its own story. Book 2 follows on from that. Book 3 kind of follows the events. So we kind of go back to before book 1, follow the events of book 1, follow the events of book 2, and finish up at the end of book 3. And I was a bit nervous because it's not a very long book. You know, I was really curious to see how you can stretch a relationship across multiple years of storytelling. But I feel like it was done really well. And I feel like the characters who we met in previous books were consistently that character. So one of my big criticisms of Daydream by Hannah Grace, loved the rest of the Maple Hills series, but I felt like Henry was a completely different character in book 3 than he's consistently been in books 1 and 2. I was really nervous I was going to experience the same thing with our main characters Fionn and Rose. No. They felt consistent, they felt grounded. These were the characters that we met. And the changes that they experienced throughout the book because of various different choices and plot events made sense for them as individuals and them in their relationship together. The first couple chapters of this hooked me. So we meet Rose. Rose is like a circus performer. So she reads like tarot cards at the circus and she travels around with them. She's also like a motorbike stunt rider. So when we meet her, she's doing her tarot readings. We find out she's the Sparrow. She finds ways to help women leave their abusive husbands and partners. Generally, the abusive partner is no longer alive. She meets a woman who's come to her for help, and we also meet the abusive husband. Rose decides the husband's just an absolute piece of shit and decides, you know what, instead of doing this as like a third party thing, I'm gonna get in there and I'm gonna do the job myself. She ends up getting one of her circus friends to like pickpocket the man's wallet. He's like a young kid. Mum swore she'd get me a PlayStation the next time she goes on holidays. So what you're gonna do as payment for me getting this wallet is buy me like a whole cocktail set so I can bring the holiday for her so she can get a PlayStation for me. Because she's a motorbike rider, she's one of the only people in the circus who like can freely come and go, so she often does errands for people. She goes and gets the cocktail set, including like a pineapple. She's got like cocktail stirring sticks, like a whole bunch of stuff. Then she decides to follow this man home. She finds him like in the middle of a field after he's been yelling at his wife and kids, you know, horrible person. She sees there's like a baseball bat on the floor. So she decides that her like small dainty little circus performer is gonna beat this man to death with a baseball bat. This man is huge. She has never done this before. She's there wearing like her motorcycle helmet. He sees her and like turns the tables on her, basically picks up the bat, breaks her leg. They're in like a struggle. She ends up using the cocktail stirrer sticks to like stab him in the eyeball. Ends up escaping. Didn't go so well. Gee, I wonder why. She ends up turning up at this random doctor's surgery and tries to fix her leg herself. We meet Fionn, who's our main male character. He's like he's a bit of a fitness nut. He's off on a run. His like Apple Watch or whatever it is goes off with the security at his surgery, seeing that there's like a woman bleeding out, and so he like runs to go and help her, and that's kind of where our story starts. It was a really strong start to the book, and the way that these characters befriend each other and proceed to fall in love. I loved seeing the cameos from our previous characters in this. I'm actually devastated that the series is finished now, because even though I had mixed feelings on the second book, I did overall love the experience of reading it. But at the end of the book, we do get a tease about what might be coming next. And I'm really excited to continue reading more of Bryn's work because I have enjoyed overall the experience. The last book I read for the month was All Better Now. Again, another one I'm not going to talk about intensively because I've already vlogged about it on the channel. I kind of had mixed feelings upon finishing the book, but now having sat with it for By now it's been a few days. Overall, I had good feelings. I gave it 4 stars. The book itself is very heavily inspired by the COVID experience. This is set in a post-COVID world where another virus spreads throughout the world. So very similar to COVID, they get sick. We do find that people who are immunocompromised do succumb and pass away from the virus, but those who contract the virus and survive it have like a psychological change in their brain as a side effect of recovery, where they find themselves completely content and happy. And it talks about the way that the psychological changes affect the entire socio-economic structure of the world. It is not a character-driven book, it is a plot-driven book with some really interesting ethical questions. And overall, I liked the way that it was explored. I feel like dystopian YA was the perfect genre to explore this story. And overall, I had a good time. So, 7 books I read in March, 3 I own, 2 were borrowed, and 2 were on audiobook. Overall, had a good time. I hope you also had a good reading month and maybe were challenged in some of your own perspectives during your reading. I am about to get into these shelves. I am ready to have a shelf update. So if you want to watch that, click subscribe, stick around on the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.